Nathaniel Pierce straightened his tie, whispered something into the ear of the woman beside him, and laughed the easy, careless laugh of a man who believed he had never once been caught. He slid his arm around her waist as they walked through the terminal. He had told his wife he was flying to Geneva, alone, for business. He had even kissed her cheek that morning before she left for work. And now here he was, boarding a flight to Dubai, holding another woman's hand, absolutely certain that nobody who mattered would ever know. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning had started the way most Tuesday mornings in the Hart-Pierce household started, quietly, efficiently, and with the kind of polite distance that had become the wallpaper of their marriage. Captain Amelia Hart was already in her uniform when Nathaniel came downstairs. She was standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee that had gone slightly cold, reviewing the weather reports she had pulled up on her tablet. A low-pressure system over the mid-Atlantic. Nothing serious. Manageable. She had flown through worse. Nathaniel walked in wearing the charcoal suit she had helped him pick out 2 Christmases ago. He looked good. He always looked good. That was one of the first things she had ever noticed about him back when they were both 28, and the world still felt like it was made of open doors. "Early start," he said, reaching past her for the coffee maker. "New York to Dubai," she said. "First command assignment on this route." He turned and looked at her, and for just a moment something moved across his face. Something she couldn't quite name. Not pride exactly, not warmth. More like a brief calculation, the way a person looks at a situation and decides how to respond to it before the response actually comes. "That's great," he said. "Really, you've been waiting for this one." 12 years, she said simply. He nodded. He poured his coffee. He checked his phone. "Geneva conference starts tomorrow morning," he said, not looking up. "I'll probably be gone 4 or 5 days. Hartwell wants me there early to prep the pitch with the international team." Amelia nodded. She had already known about Geneva. He had mentioned it 3 times over the past 2 weeks, each time with slightly different details, but she had learned not to notice that. Or rather, she had learned to file it somewhere quiet and deal with it later. "Safe flight," she said. "You too," he said. And that was the whole of it. No embrace, no real goodbye, just 2 people moving around each other in a kitchen the way water moves around rocks automatically without thinking, because that is simply what water does. She picked up her bag and left. He waited until he heard her car pull out of the driveway before he picked up his phone and sent a message. "She's gone. I'll meet you at the terminal. Gate B, 2 hours. The reply came in seconds. A single red heart. Nathaniel smiled, finished his coffee, and went upstairs to pack. Amelia's world, once she stepped through the crew entrance at JFK, became the only world she fully trusted. It had always been this way. From the moment she had first climbed into a cockpit at 19 years old, a nervous, sharp-eyed girl from Dayton, Ohio, whose father had handed her a library book about Amelia Earhart and told her the sky had no ceiling. Aviation had been the one place where she felt entirely herself, entirely in control, entirely known. She moved through this pre-flight checklist the way a musician moves through a piece of music they have memorized so deeply it lives inside the body rather than the mind. She spoke with her co-pilot, First Officer Daniel Reyes, a quiet and competent 34-year-old from Houston who had been flying with her for the better part of 2 years. They had a good rhythm, the two of them. Professional, respectful, easy. "Weather looks clean past the Atlantic," Daniel said, scanning the updated forecast. "Agreed. Some turbulence over the Gulf region probably around hour 10. We'll brief the cabin crew before we hit it. Fuel load. Good. Ground crew confirmed. We're ahead of schedule." She settled into her seat, ran her hands along the controls the way she always did, not checking them exactly more, greeting them the way you reach out to touch the shoulder of someone you have always trusted, and allowed herself one quiet moment of something that might have been happiness. New York to Dubai, her route, her aircraft, her command. 12 years, she had earned this. The purser, a tall and unflappable woman named Patricia, who had been flying internationally for 23 years, leaned in through the cockpit door. Captain passenger boarding is at 92%. We have 2 first-class upgrades to confirm and 1 passenger in seat 2A who has made 3 separate requests to speak with the flight crew before departure. Amelia looked up from her instruments. About what? He hasn't said. He's being... Patricia paused, choosing her word carefully, persistent. Tell him we'll address any concerns through standard cabin channels. Is he creating a disruption? Not yet. He's just very insistent on knowing who the captain is. Amelia frowned slightly but let it go. Nervous flyers, business passengers who wanted to feel important. She had seen both 1,000 times. Make sure he's comfortable and get him a drink if he needs one. We'll be fine. Of course, Captain. Patricia withdrew. Amelia turned back to her pre-flight sequence. It was standard practice on her aircraft had been since the very beginning of her command career to review the full passenger manifest before departure. Not because regulations required it at that level of detail, but because Amelia Hart believed that the 286 human beings who were about to trust her with their lives deserved to be more than a head count. She liked knowing, at least in some small way, who was on her airplane. She pulled up the manifest on the secondary screen. First class, 14 passengers. She scanned the names the way you scan a familiar page, quickly, automatically, not really expecting to land on anything remarkable. And then she stopped. Seat 2. A. Nathaniel Pierce. The name hit her the way cold water hits total immediate shocking. She stared at it. Nathaniel Pierce, her husband, who was supposed to be flying to Geneva. For a moment, she didn't breathe. She simply read the name again, as if repetition might change. It might reveal that she had misread, that this was a coincidence, that there was another Nathaniel Pierce in New York City who was flying to Dubai today on the same aircraft his wife was commanding. Then she read the next line. Seat 2B, Vanessa Vale, reservation type couple Mr. and Mrs. Pierce. Amelia's hand went very still on the edge of the screen. She read it a third time. Mrs. Pierce. Nathaniel had boarded her aircraft with another woman, had registered that woman under the title of his wife, had used her name, her legal name, the name she had carried for 11 years of marriage, as a label for someone else, in her own airplane. She sat with it for exactly 4 seconds. She knew because she counted. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then she said in a voice so level it surprised even her Daniel, Captain, I need 60 seconds. Keep running the checklist. Of course. She set down her pen. She breathed. She looked straight ahead through the cockpit window at the gray morning sky above the runway, the kind of sky that holds its weather close and gives nothing away before it's ready. She thought about Nathaniel's face at the kitchen counter that morning, the charcoal suit, the way he had reached past her for the coffee, the easy, practiced way he had said, That's great, really, you've been waiting for this one. He had known. When he said those words, he already knew he was going to board her airplane. He had already booked the tickets, already made the reservation, had already decided that Mr. and Mrs. Pierce were flying to Dubai and that the Mrs. Pierce he was bringing was not the one he had married. Something moved through Amelia's chest. Not tears, not fury. Something colder and more precise than either of those. Something that felt in its own strange way like clarity. She picked up her pen. She kept working. In seat 2, a Nathaniel Pierce was not comfortable. He had not been comfortable since the moment he sat down, ordered a whiskey he didn't really want, and heard the first officer's voice come over the intercom to welcome passengers aboard Flight 247 to Dubai, operated under the command of Captain Amelia Hart. He had actually stopped breathing for a moment. Amelia Hart, not Pierce. She had always kept her name professionally. He had teased her about it once early in the marriage, and she had looked at him with those calm gray eyes and said, Hart is who I am in the air. Pierce is who I am with you. I like keeping those things separate. He had laughed and said that was fine. He was not laughing now. He turned slowly in his seat and looked at the cockpit door. Nate? Vanessa touched his arm. She was a beautiful woman, mid-30s, composed accustomed to first class. She had met Nathaniel at an industry conference 14 months ago and had spent the last 8 months believing, as he had carefully encouraged her to believe, that his marriage was over in all the ways that mattered and that the paperwork was simply a formality. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," he said. "You're not fine. You've gone completely white." "I said I'm fine, Vanessa." His voice came out sharper than he intended, and she pulled her hand back, and he watched her expression close, the way a door closes quietly, but with a finality that registered somewhere in the back of his mind, even through his current panic. He pressed the call button. Patricia appeared within seconds. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Pierce?" "I need to speak with the captain," he said, "before we take off. It's important." Patricia's expression remained entirely professional. "I'm afraid the captain is completing pre-flight procedures and isn't available for passenger contact at this time. Is there something I can assist you with directly?" "No," Nathaniel said. "No, it has to be the captain." "I understand. I'll pass along your request. Can I get you anything in the meantime we have?" "I don't want anything. I need to speak with her." Patricia nodded once, said, "Of course, Mr. Pierce," and walked away. In the cockpit, she leaned in and said quietly, "He's asking for you by name, Captain." "I know," Amelia said, without looking up from her checklist. "Would you like me to? Tell him the captain is occupied and will address passenger concerns at the appropriate time." "Yes, Captain." The door closed. Daniel Reyes said nothing. He was a perceptive man, and he could feel the charge in the air, the way you feel a change in atmospheric pressure, not by seeing it, but by the way everything around you subtly adjusts. He focused on his instruments and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to do. Amelia finished her checklist. She keyed the intercom, and her voice filled the aircraft clear, warm, utterly unhurried. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Amelia Hart, speaking. On behalf of myself and First Officer Daniel Reyes and the entire cabin crew, welcome aboard Flight 247 nonstop service from John F. Kennedy International Airport to Dubai International. We're looking at a flight time of approximately 12 hours and 40 minutes today, with some light turbulence expected over the Gulf region toward the end of our journey. The weather in Dubai is currently clear and warm at a beautiful 81 degrees. Sit back, get comfortable. We're going to take good care of you. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." In seat 2, a Nathaniel Pierce closed his eyes. That voice, completely controlled, not a tremor, not a crack. He pressed his back against his seat as the aircraft began to move, and he thought for the first time in a long time that he might actually be in serious trouble. The aircraft lifted off at 9:47 in the morning. Amelia felt the wheels leave the ground the way she always did, with something that was not quite relief and not quite joy, but lived in the territory between them, a physical sense of the world releasing its claim on you. She brought the aircraft to cruising altitude over the next 20 minutes, working with Daniel through the ascent sequence, communicating with air traffic control, adjusting for a slight crosswind that pushed in from the northwest. And while she did all of that in the very back of her mind, behind everything professional and focused and calm, one thought ran like a quiet current. He is on this airplane. She had two choices. She had always been a person who reduced complicated situations to their simplest structure, because in aviation, clear thinking was the only thing that stood between you and catastrophe. She could let it consume her right now, the hurt, the anger, the grief of seeing her husband's name next to another woman's on a passenger manifest in a reservation that said Mrs. Pierce where she was supposed to be. She could let her hands shake and her mind spiral and allow the enormity of what had just happened to flood every part of her. Or she could fly the airplane. 286 passengers, 14 in first class, families, children, business travelers, people who had kissed their own spouses goodbye this morning and gotten on this plane trusting that the person in this cockpit was 100% present and 100% focused. She chose the airplane, not because she didn't feel it. She felt it like a bruise forming under her ribs, dull and deep and spreading. She felt it every time she heard Patricia's voice through the intercom and imagined Nathaniel sitting 20 feet away, drinking his whiskey, calculating his next move. But feeling something and surrendering to it were two completely different things. Amelia Hart had learned that lesson the hard way in a cockpit over the Pacific Ocean during a hydraulic emergency 4 years ago, when she had been terrified for approximately 3 seconds and then had decided to be a pilot instead. She was a pilot. She chose the airplane. At 37,000 feet, Vanessa Vale was doing math. She was not a stupid woman. She had never been a stupid woman. It was, in fact, one of the quiet ironies of the situation she found herself in. She was intelligent enough to have suspected at various points over the past 8 months that everything Nathaniel told her was not necessarily the whole truth. And she had, at those moments, chosen to believe him anyway, which was perhaps the most honest thing she could say about herself right now. But the name over the intercom had struck something loose. Captain Amelia Hart. She knew Nathaniel's wife's name. Of course she did. You always know the name of the person whose life you are partially dismantling, even when nobody says it out loud. Amelia Hart, the pilot wife. Nathaniel had mentioned her maybe 4 or 5 times in 8 months, always in the same tired, practiced cadence the marriage had run its course. They were essentially separated. It was complicated, but it was over. The paperwork just took time. Vanessa leaned over slightly and looked at the cockpit door. Then she looked at Nathaniel. He was staring at the same door with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Fear. Clean, exposed animal fear. "Nate," she said quietly. "That's your wife flying this plane, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. He turned to look at her and she watched him assemble a denial and then abandon it. He had enough self-awareness to know that a lie right now would be somehow worse than the truth. "It's a coincidence," he said instead. "Is it, Vanessa? The reservation says Mrs. Pierce." Her voice was very calm. Dangerously calm in the way that certain weather systems are calm before they are catastrophic. "I assumed that was I thought it was how the system—" She stopped. "Did you put my name in as your wife?" "It was easier for the booking," he said. "Business account. The system required. Did you put my name in as your wife?" The word sat between them like something dropped from a great height. "Yes," he said. Vanessa said nothing for a very long moment. Outside the window, there was nothing but blue, the vast, clean, indifferent blue of the upper atmosphere, where the world looked small and human problems looked smaller. Then she picked up her glass of champagne and took a long, slow sip and set it down carefully and turned to look at the seat-back screen in front of her, as though Nathaniel Pierce had already in some important sense ceased to exist. At hour 2, Patricia made her way back to the cockpit. "Captain," she said, "I thought you should know. The passenger in 2A has now requested to speak with you 4 times. He's not causing a scene, but the cabin crew has noticed the tension. Is he impeding anyone? No. Is he being abusive or aggressive toward the staff? No, Captain, just persistent. Then we continue as normal," Amelia said. "And Patricia, I need you to do something for me." "Of course. Pull the passenger file for 2A and 2B, the complete booking record, payment information, originating account, all of it. Print it if you can or save it to the flight record system." Patricia was too experienced and too professional to ask why. "Understood, Captain. Anything else?" "Not right now, thank you." The door closed again. Daniel Reyes, to his lasting credit, continued to say absolutely nothing. Amelia looked at the horizon ahead of them. Clear, endless, hers. She thought about the note she would write. She didn't know yet exactly what it would say. She only knew that it would be short and that it would be true and that she would not be crying when she wrote it. Some things she had learned are too serious for tears. They require something else, something quieter, something that lasts longer than grief and builds itself out of different materials. She thought about the word precision. She thought about the 12 years she had spent in the air learning how to remain steady when everything around her was in motion. She thought, he has no idea what he's done. Not because he had been unfaithful, not even because he had brought another woman onto her aircraft and registered her under the name of his wife, because he had done it the one morning in her entire career when she was flying the airplane, the one morning that was entirely hers. He had walked into her world not by accident, but by the particular kind of careless arrogance that had been building in Nathaniel Pierce for years, and he had brought his disaster with him, and he had no idea, no possible idea what happened to things that disrupted Amelia Hart's flight. They got managed, they got documented, they got handled, and then they got left behind on the ground. The aircraft hummed around her at cruising altitude, 286 souls in its care, the Atlantic stretching dark and enormous below, and Captain Amelia Hart took a breath and kept flying. She had married Nathaniel 11 years ago in a small ceremony in upstate New York under maple trees that were just beginning to turn red with 37 guests and a cake that was slightly lopsided because the baker had apologized twice, but Amelia had said it was fine. She liked things that were a little bit imperfect. He had been brilliant then. Not in the spectacular way, but in the quiet, confident we are going somewhere way that is more seductive than any amount of obvious glamour. He had a vision for himself, and that vision was large, and Amelia had believed in it the way you believe in a good aircraft, because the engineering is sound and the record is clean, and everything tells you it is safe to put your trust there. For the first 5 years, she had not been wrong. They had built something real, an apartment in Manhattan, a life with shape to it, dinners with friends, long conversations about ideas, a shared shorthand that couples develop over time, the private vocabulary of a life lived close together. And then something had shifted. Gradually, the way things erode not by any single dramatic event, but by the accumulation of small absences. He had started traveling more, started coming home later, started looking at her with an expression she could not quite name, somewhere between admiration and resentment, as though her success in her own career was doing something to him that he could not entirely control. She had tried to talk about it, twice directly, 3 other times in ways that left more room for him to avoid the center of it if he needed to. Each time he had reassured her. Everything was fine. The pressure of the business, long hours. He was sorry. He would do better. She had believed him, not blindly. She was not a blind person, but she had chosen to believe him the way you choose to believe the weather report, even knowing it might be wrong, because what is the alternative? You can't live in constant preparation for catastrophe. Now at 37,000 feet, she understood that she had been catastrophically correct. And somewhere in the part of her that was not the captain, the part that was still the girl from Dayton who had believed the sky had no ceiling, something broke quietly and fell away. She did not let it show. Not yet. There was still a long way to fly. At hour 4, something unexpected happened. Richard Langford, seated in 3A. A heavy-set man in his early 60s with the kind of face that suggested he had made a great deal of money by watching other people very carefully, called Patricia over. "I'd like to speak with whoever manages the in-flight business services," he said. Patricia arranged it. Within 10 minutes, Langford was reviewing something on his tablet, with a frown that deepened the longer he sat with it. He had been for the past 2 years Nathaniel's largest investor. He had poured just under $4 million into Pierce Consulting's International Expansion Fund. He had done so based on a very specific set of projections, a very specific set of promises, and a very specific understanding of how the company's expense accounts were being managed. He had coincidentally, 3 days prior to this flight, received an email from his accountant flagging a series of irregular disbursements connected to Pierce Consulting's corporate card. He hadn't thought much about it at the time, but now sitting here on a long flight with nothing to do but think, he pulled up the records on his tablet. The Dubai trip was on the corporate card. 2 first-class tickets, hotel suite, a dinner reservation at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, a business conference in Geneva, Nathaniel had told him. Representing the International Expansion Fund. Langford looked up from his tablet and across the first-class cabin at the back of Nathaniel Pierce's head. He pressed his lips together. Then he flagged down Patricia and asked for black coffee and a notepad. He had some thinking to do. In seat 2, Nathaniel was running out of strategies. He had tried getting a message to Amelia through Patricia 4 times. Patricia had responded each time with the same pleasant, impenetrable professionalism. He had tried writing a text message, only to remember that there was no cell service at 37,000 feet, and the aircraft's Wi-Fi was down due to a technical issue that had been announced over the intercom approximately 1 hour in. He had tried to calm himself down by reasoning through it. Amelia was a professional. She would not do anything to compromise the flight. Whatever she was feeling, she would keep it behind that cockpit door until they landed, and then they would talk. He would explain. He was good at explaining. He had always been good at finding the language to reshape a situation, to locate the version of events that was most manageable, most survivable, most likely to leave him standing. He would do that. When they landed, he would find the right words. The problem was that every time he thought about Amelia's voice on the intercom, calm, warm, completely steady, something cold moved through him that he could not talk himself out of. He knew that voice. He knew what it meant when Amelia Hart got quiet. It did not mean she was losing. It meant she had already decided something. It meant the conversation in her head was over, and she had reached a conclusion, and now everything she did was simply the execution of that conclusion. He had seen it happen twice in their marriage. Once when a contractor had tried to overcharge them and gaslit Amelia about the contract terms, and she had simply gone quiet, pulled out every document, and filed a complaint so thorough and precise that the contractor had refunded the money and then some. And once when a senior officer at the airline had questioned whether she had the experience to advance to a particular route, and she had said nothing that day, but had spent the next 9 months accumulating every possible qualification until the question was unanswerable. When Amelia went quiet, things were already over. She was quiet now. And they still had 8 hours to fly. Nathaniel pressed his head back against the seat and stared at the ceiling of the aircraft and felt for the first time in a very long time completely and utterly trapped. The hours passed the way hours do at altitude, with a kind of suspension that makes normal time feel distant and irrelevant. Passengers slept, the cabin lights dimmed. Patricia moved through first class with the silent efficiency of long practice. Amelia drank cold coffee and ate half a meal and flew. She did not think about Nathaniel more than necessary. She thought about the documents Patricia had quietly delivered to her, the booking record, the payment confirmation, the account details. She read them once carefully, the way she read every piece of information that was going to matter, with full attention and no emotion, gathering what was true and setting aside everything else. The credit card was a joint account. The booking had been made 11 days ago. This was not a spontaneous act of passion. This was a planned trip, scheduled, arranged, booked with her money under her name on the airline, where she worked on a route she had just been assigned to command. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant that he had done it this way. Not carelessly, no. This was not carelessness. Nathaniel Pierce was not a careless man. He was calculating and he was confident. And the only explanation she could find for why he had done it exactly this way was that he had simply never imagined she would see the manifest, had never imagined she would know, had never considered the possibility for even a single moment that the world might not arrange itself around his comfort the way it always had. That told her something important. It told her how long he had lived this way, how deeply he had come to believe that certain things were simply outside the range of consequences that applied to him. She looked at the horizon ahead of her. 8 more hours, she would fly every one of them, and when she landed, she would know exactly what to do. In 2B, Vanessa Vale had stopped drinking champagne. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and she did a kind of quiet private accounting that she had been avoiding for the better part of 8 months. He had told her the marriage was over. She had believed him. He had told her his wife was distant, checked out, more invested in her career than in their relationship. She had believed that too. She had believed it partly because it made her feel better, and she was honest enough with herself to know that, and partly because there is a particular kind of man who is very skilled at making you feel like the solution rather than the complication, and Nathaniel Pierce was that kind of man. But right now, somewhere behind that cockpit door, the wife who was supposedly checked out and distant and only going through the motions was flying a commercial aircraft across the Atlantic Ocean with 300 people's lives in her hands, and from everything Vanessa could see, she was doing it with complete and total composure. She thought about the reservation, Mrs. Pierce. She thought about what it meant that he had used that name, that he had not even given her the dignity of her own name on the booking. He had borrowed his wife's identity and slipped Vanessa into it, like a costume, like a prop, like a placeholder. She was not, she realized, the person he wanted. She was the person who was convenient to want in the absence of the courage it took to want anything real. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, even though there was no signal, and opened the Notes app and sat for a while thinking about what she wanted to type. After a long time, she typed, "When we land, I am done." She put the phone away. Outside the window, the sky was turning the particular shade of dark that comes before the stars appear, that brief suspended moment when the light has left, but the dark has not yet fully arrived. Vanessa looked at it for a long time. She thought, she doesn't deserve this, and then more quietly, neither do I. In 3A, Richard Langford was on his 4th page of notes. He had a very good memory for numbers and an even better memory for the things people said when they wanted you to trust them. He was replaying with increasing clarity every conversation he had ever had with Nathaniel Pierce about the International Expansion Fund and cross-referencing those conversations with the expense records on his tablet, and what he was finding was not technically illegal. Not yet, not from what he could see, but it was the kind of thing that in his experience was never just one thing. The Dubai trip was troubling, but the pattern was more troubling. Small diversions, creative categorizations, business purposes that grew less specific the closer you looked. He wrote 3 names on his notepad: his personal attorney, his accountant, his head of corporate compliance. He would call all 3 the moment they landed. He looked again at the back of Nathaniel's head. He thought, "I trusted you." And then he thought, "That was my mistake, not yours, and I do not make the same mistake twice." He put the notepad away and closed his eyes and waited for Dubai. 12 hours is a long time to sit with something. It is long enough for the first wave of shock to recede, and the second wave, the slower, deeper one, the one that carries actual understanding, to move in. Amelia felt it around hour 7. She was alone in the cockpit. Daniel had stepped out briefly, and she had asked to be left undisturbed for a few minutes, a captain's prerogative, and she was looking at the black sky ahead, thick with stars at this altitude, and she felt it. Not the betrayal, not the anger, the grief, not for the man she had discovered him to be. She was already, she realized, surprisingly clear about him. The clarity was almost chemical, the way pain sometimes produces its own strange lucidity. The grief was for the person she had been while she was trusting him, for the version of Amelia Hart who had come home from flights and told him about her day and planned their future and believed quietly, without making a big thing of it, the way she believed in most things she cared about, that they were building something together. That person had existed. That marriage had existed. Whatever it had been made of, it had been made of real hours and real effort and real hope. And he had taken all of that and treated it like something he could slip into his carry-on without declaring it. She sat with the grief for exactly as long as she allowed herself, which was in the end about 4 minutes. Then she picked up her coffee cup and found it was empty. She pressed the intercom for Patricia. "Can you bring me a fresh coffee, please?" "Of course, Captain." She looked back at the stars. 12 years of wanting this route, this aircraft, this moment. He had not taken that from her. He could not take that from her. It was built into her bones, into the calluses on her hands, into the precise, unhurried way she moved through a pre-flight checklist. It was hers in a way that nothing he had done or was capable of doing could reach. She thought, "When we land, I know what I am doing." She thought, "He is going to find out what it means to underestimate someone who has been flying since she was 19 years old." She thought, 286 passengers are going home safely tonight. That was what she was here for. That was who she was. The door opened and Patricia set a fresh coffee beside her, and Amelia said thank you and meant it completely, and she flew. Hour 5, 38,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Nathaniel Pierce had stopped pressing the call button, not because he had given up, but because he had switched strategies, and switching strategies was what Nathaniel Pierce did when the first approach stopped working. He was above all else an adapter, a man who read the room and recalibrated. It was what had made him successful in business. It was what had kept him for almost 2 years successfully managing a double life without a single significant crack. He leaned back in his seat and forced his breathing to slow down. He made himself think the way he thought in boardrooms, not reactively, but architecturally. What were the walls? What were the doors? What was the fastest path from where he was to where he needed to be? The problem he was increasingly aware was that he could not identify a single door. Amelia was in a locked cockpit. She was not going to come out. She was not going to respond to messages through Patricia, who had now taken on the particular quality of a very polished wall. The flight was 5 hours in, with more than 7 remaining, and Nathaniel Pierce, for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, had absolutely no leverage. He hated that feeling the way other men hated physical pain. It was visceral. It sat in his chest like something with weight. Vanessa had not spoken to him in over an hour. That was its own problem. He glanced sideways at her. She was reading something on her phone, or pretending to, which amounted to the same thing. Her posture had changed. There was a quality to the way she was holding herself, a kind of deliberate stillness that reminded him uncomfortably of Amelia, not in any superficial sense, but in the deeper sense of a person who has made a decision and is now simply waiting for the right moment to execute it. He did not like seeing that quality in Vanessa. He had always experienced Vanessa as warm, open, emotionally available in the way that had made her easy to be around. The stillness did not suit his preferred version of her. "We should talk," he said quietly. She turned a page, or scrolled. The gesture was identical. About what, Nathaniel? About this situation. About how we handle the next few hours. She looked up at him then, and he saw something in her eyes that he had not seen before. Not anger, not tears, something cleaner and more dangerous than either of those. "Handle?" she repeated. "That's an interesting word choice." "Vanessa, did you know she was the pilot?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. The cabin around them was dim, most passengers sleeping or resting, but she kept her voice low with the careful instinct of a woman who had learned not to make scenes in expensive places. "Before today, did you know it was possible she'd be assigned to this route?" He opened his mouth. She watched him, and he closed it again, because the answer was complicated in a way that no version of it would sound good. "You knew she'd been trying for this route," Vanessa said. "You told me, months ago. You said something about her and the Dubai assignment, and how it was all she ever talked about." She paused. "You knew it was possible." "I didn't think—" "No." She turned back to her screen. "You didn't think. Or you did think, and you decided the odds were low enough that it didn't matter. Either way." She said the last 2 words with a finality that closed the topic like a door shutting on a cold room. Nathaniel sat with that. Outside the window, the Atlantic was black and enormous and entirely indifferent. He thought, "I need to get in front of this before we land." He thought, "I need to find a way to talk to her." He thought, "There has to be a door somewhere." There wasn't. Hour 6. 37,500 feet. Richard Langford ordered his 5th black coffee of the flight, which was 2 more than he normally allowed himself, and returned to his notepad with the methodical energy of a man who had built 3 companies from scratch, and understood that the most important thing you could do when you suspected something was wrong was to write everything down before the feeling faded. He had 4 pages now. The first page was dates and figures, the disbursements from Pierce Consulting's corporate account that his accountant had flagged cross-referenced against the trip details he had pulled from his own expense authorization records. The numbers did not add up in the specific way that numbers fail to add up when someone is being creative with categorization. The second page was a timeline, when Nathaniel had pitched him, when the fund had been established, when the first irregularities had appeared in the quarterly reports, subtle enough that Langford had attributed them to administrative overlap and moved on. He did not move on from things lightly. That had been a departure from his own standards, and he was honest enough to ask himself why. The answer, when he looked at it clearly, was that he had liked Nathaniel. He had found him charming and sharp and convincing in the specific way that made you want to be in business with someone. And he had let that feeling do work that due diligence was supposed to do. That was a mistake he would not be making again. The third page was names, lawyers, auditors, 2 individuals in his network who had done business with Nathaniel independently and who he now wanted to call. The fourth page had only 1 line written in capital letters, because Langford was not a man who needed reminding of things he had already decided, but wrote them down anyway out of discipline. Launch full audit, Monday morning, no exceptions. He underlined it twice. capped his pen, looked at the seat in front of him, which was Nathaniel Pierce's seat, which he could identify by the particular quality of tension in the shoulders of the man sitting in it. Langford had been reading people for 40 years. He knew what a man looked like when he was trapped. He knew what a man looked like when he understood, perhaps for the first time, that the story he had been telling was coming apart at the seams. He drank his coffee. He was not going to say anything on this flight. That was not his style. His style was to gather, confirm, and then act with the kind of precision that left no room for the other person to maneuver. He would be ready on Monday. Hour 7. Somewhere above Western Europe. Patricia found Amelia in the brief quiet of the cockpit, Daniel having stepped out again for a rest cycle, and she stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking, because she was a woman who had been reading rooms and people for 23 years, and she understood that this particular room required a specific kind of care. "Captain," she said, "I want to check in with you directly." Amelia did not look away from the instrument panel. "I'm fine, Patricia. I know you are." Patricia stepped inside and let the door close behind her. She kept her voice low and even. "I want you to know that the cabin crew is handling everything in first class with complete discretion. No one has said anything inappropriate to either passenger in 2A or 2B. We are managing the situation exactly as you would want." "I know." Amelia glanced at her. "Thank you. I've also kept the full booking record in the flight system as you requested. Payment confirmation, account details, the complete chain." "Good." Patricia paused. Then, because she was the kind of woman who had survived 23 years in a service profession without losing either her spine or her humanity, she said, "Is there anything else you need, not professionally, personally?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Amelia's hands were steady on the controls. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and even and completely honest. "Not right now. Ask me again in about 6 hours." Patricia nodded. "I'll be here." She left. Amelia looked at the sky ahead, dark, still the stars beginning to thin as the eastern horizon started its slow, almost imperceptible warming, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Gratitude. Not for the situation, not for any part of what Nathaniel had done or what she was going to have to do in its aftermath, but for the fact that she had people on this aircraft and off it who were steady, who were real, who showed up and stood in doorways and asked the right questions and knew when to leave and when to stay. She had built that. Over 12 years in the air, she had built a life in aviation that was entirely her own, and the people in it reflected the standards she had set. Nobody had handed that to her. Nobody had given her access to it as a benefit of marriage or status or connection. She had earned every single relationship on this aircraft. That thought did something clarifying to the grief that had moved through her at hour 7. It did not erase it, but it put it in proportion. She was not, it turned out, as alone as a person discovering a betrayal at 37,000 feet might expect to be. That mattered. Hour 8. The eastern sky beginning to change. Vanessa Vale went to the restroom and did not come back for 11 minutes, which was long enough that Nathaniel, watching the aisle, began to feel a different kind of anxiety, layering itself over the one he already had. When she came back, she sat down and did not look at him, and he could see from the slight puffiness around her eyes that she had been crying, but her expression was composed in a way that made the crying feel like something that had already happened and been dealt with, rather than something that was still happening. "Vanessa," he said. "Don't," she said. "I just want to—" "Nathaniel." She turned and looked at him fully, for the first time in hours, and the look on her face was not rage and not tears, and not the particular kind of wounded expression he was practiced at navigating. It was something worse. It was clear-eyed and quiet and utterly without illusion. "I am going to say this once, and I need you to hear it because I mean it completely. When this plane lands, I'm getting in a separate car, going to a separate hotel, and flying home on a separate flight. Whatever happens between you and your wife, and she is clearly still your wife, entirely, your wife in every way that matters that is between you and her, I will not be a part of it." He felt the floor shift slightly. Not the aircraft, something internal. "You don't have to—" "I am not negotiating," she said. "I am telling you what is going to happen." She straightened slightly and looked forward. I actually feel sorry for her. Can you imagine that I feel sorry for her and I don't even know her, and she is the one flying this airplane? She almost laughed, except it wasn't funny, and they both knew it. What kind of woman does that? Finds out what she finds out and just keeps flying? Nathaniel said nothing. A better one than I've been, Vanessa said quietly. And she meant herself, and she meant more than just the last 8 months, and Nathaniel understood that, and he didn't know what to do with it, so he said nothing. The silence between them settled in like a third passenger. It did not leave. Hour 9, the twist that changed everything. At hour 9 and 14 minutes, Patricia came back to the cockpit with something that was not a coffee refill and not a routine check-in. She closed the door behind her and she said, "Captain, I think you need to know something." Amelia looked up. The passenger in 3A. Patricia kept her voice steady, but there was something careful in it, something that told Amelia she was choosing her words with precision. "Richard Langford." "I know who he is," Amelia said, and she did. She had seen the name on the manifest and noted it the way she noted all names, automatically cataloged, filed. Langford Industries, a name that appeared in business news with some regularity, and a name she now realized with a jolt that she kept entirely off her face that appeared on the list of Nathaniel's investors that she had seen on documents at home. "He's been taking notes for the past 4 hours," Patricia said. "Detailed notes, financial documents on his tablet. He asked me about the passenger in 2A, not by name, but he described him accurately enough that I knew who he meant. He didn't ask me to confirm it. He just said the man in 2A. And then he said, 'I think I may owe your captain an apology on his behalf.'" The cockpit was very quiet for a moment. Amelia said, "He said that." Word for word. She processed it. Richard Langford, sitting 3 feet behind Nathaniel Pierce, had spent 4 hours reviewing financial records and had arrived at conclusions substantial enough that he felt he owed the captain an apology on behalf of the man in 2A, which meant that whatever Nathaniel had been doing with that investment fund, Langford had found enough of it from the inside of a first-class cabin at cruising altitude to reach a conclusion. She thought, "It's worse than I knew." She thought, "Of course it is." "Thank you, Patricia," she said. "Please tell Mr. Langford that the captain appreciates his consideration and will be available to speak after landing if he wishes." "Yes, Captain." The door closed. Daniel came back in and settled into his seat and looked at the instruments and said nothing, and Amelia was grateful for him in a way she would remember long after this flight was over. She took a breath. She thought about the joint account, the corporate card, the fund. She thought about the documents at home statements she had glanced at and not questioned reports she had trusted him to manage because she was flying and he was not, because they had divided their life that way, because she had believed in the architecture of their partnership, the same way she believed in the architecture of an aircraft trust, the engineering trust, the builder. Do your own job and let the structure hold. The structure had not held. She made 3 decisions in the next 90 seconds, each one clean and final, and requiring no further deliberation. She would secure every joint financial account the moment she had cell signal on the ground. She would call Margaret Ellis, her attorney, before she reached the terminal. She would not speak to Nathaniel Pierce in the Dubai airport. Not a word, not a look. She would walk through crew security, and she would make her calls, and she would let the precision of her preparation do the speaking for her. She had been flying for 12 years. She knew how to stick a landing. Hour 10, first-class seat, 2A. Nathaniel Pierce was no longer even pretending to be comfortable. He had abandoned the whiskey after the second one. His mind needed to be clear, and he knew it, and clarity was something he was having increasing difficulty manufacturing from inside his current situation. He had done the math the way he always did or tried to. He was good at math. He was good at projecting outcomes and working backward from desired results to identify the most efficient path. But he kept running into the same problem. Amelia. Not the Amelia he had grown careless with. Not the Amelia he had reduced over the past several years to a manageable background element in the story of his own life. The Amelia on the other side of that cockpit door, the one who had heard his name on a passenger manifest and had said absolutely nothing, had not confronted him, had not sent an emotional message through Patricia, had not done any of the things he might have predicted, might have prepared for, might have been able to navigate. She had simply kept flying the airplane. And she had gathered the booking records. He knew that because Patricia had printed something at the gate desk and brought it forward before they reached cruising altitude, and he was not certain it was the booking records, but he was certain enough that his stomach had done something unpleasant at the time. He pressed his palms together and thought very hard. The financial angle was the one that scared him most, not the marriage. The marriage was a disaster, and he could see that clearly now with the particular clarity that comes when disaster has fully arrived and there is no longer any point in refusing to see it. But the marriage was survivable. Marriage is ended. People rebuilt. The financial angle was different. There were things in the corporate account that he had not fully resolved. Categorizations that had seemed when he made them like reasonable interpretations of business expenses, and which now in the cold, specific light of this moment felt considerably less reasonable. The Dubai trip, certain dinners, a retainer that he had run through the business because it was simpler, and he had always intended to reconcile it later, and later had not arrived. Langford. The thought of Richard Langford hit him suddenly physically, and he had to work to keep his face neutral. Langford was on this flight, had been on this flight the entire time, sitting 3 seats back close enough to feel the turbulence of Nathaniel's situation without being directly in it. Nathaniel turned very casually, as though stretching, and looked back. Langford was writing on a notepad. His expression was the expression of a man who was not thinking about writing. He was thinking about something else entirely, and writing was simply the physical action his body was performing while his mind worked through it. Nathaniel turned back around. He felt cold. He pressed the call button. Patricia appeared. "One more water, please," he said. "Just water." "Of course, Mr. Pierce." She brought the water and left without meeting his eyes, and that small omission, the failure to meet his eyes from a flight attendant, a professional courtesy he had always taken entirely for granted, landed on him like its own small verdict. He drank the water. He looked at the seatback screen. He watched the little animated aircraft on the route map inching its way across the screen toward Dubai. 2 hours left. He thought, when we land, I can fix this. He thought, I can explain the Dubai trip. I can explain Vanessa. I can find the right framing, the right language. And then with a cold and sudden honesty that arrived without warning, he thought, she doesn't want an explanation. She stopped wanting explanations before this flight took off. She already knows everything she needs to know, and she is using these 12 hours to prepare, and I have spent this entire flight reacting while she has spent it building. For the first time in a very long time, Nathaniel Pierce felt something he could only call respect, and it arrived attached to terror, which was in its own terrible way appropriate. Hour 11, 40 minutes to descent. The eastern sky beyond the cockpit window was fully awake now. The kind of pale gold that arrives before the sun actually appears, illuminating everything softly and without drama. Amelia had always loved this light. There was something honest about it. It showed things as they were, without flattery. Daniel was running the pre-descent checklist. She joined him in it, her voice, even her hands, practiced her mind entirely on the work. They reviewed the approach sequence. Confirmed the Dubai forecast clear, warm, a light crosswind from the northwest that she would account for on final approach. Communicated with Dubai ATC and received approach clearance. Briefed the cabin crew for descent preparation. And in the back of her mind, steady and separate from all of it, the plan she had built over the past 11 hours was complete. It was not complicated. She had always been suspicious of plans that required too many moving parts. The best plans in her experience were the ones that relied on facts and preparation and the kind of patience that other people always underestimated because it looked from the outside like passivity. She had already composed in her head the text she was sending to Margaret Ellis the moment she had signal. She had already identified the 3 financial accounts she needed to secure first and the 2 she needed to audit. She had already, in the quiet architecture of her mind, moved out of the apartment and sorted the photographs and sat across from Margaret in her office and gone through every document she had gathered on this flight. She had not cried again. She was not sure she would, at least not for a while. There was too much to do, and crying required a kind of surrender to the moment that she could not afford yet. Later, she thought. Later, in a hotel room in Dubai, with the curtains pulled and the city outside, doing whatever the city did, she would sit down with it properly. She would give it the full weight of her attention. She would be a person and not a captain, and she would let it be as big as it actually was. But not yet. Right now, she was 30 minutes from landing. Right now, she had 286 people who were trusting her to put this aircraft down safely. She keyed the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hart. We are beginning our initial descent into Dubai. The local time is 6:42 in the morning, and the temperature on the ground is a beautiful 79 degrees. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. On behalf of myself and First Officer Reyes and our entire cabin crew, it has been a privilege to fly with you today. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival. In Seat 2, Nathaniel Pierce heard his wife's voice fill the aircraft for the last time. He had 11 years of knowing that voice. He knew its registers, its textures, the way it changed when she was tired, and when she was certain, and when she was keeping something controlled. He knew this voice, the way you know a song you have heard so many times it has become part of your internal soundtrack. He had never heard it sound exactly like this still, this complete. He gripped the armrest as the aircraft began its descent, and he thought with the helpless clarity of a man who understands too late exactly what he has destroyed. She is not angry. She is done. Those were not the same thing. He had always believed they were the same thing. He had always believed in the comfortable way of a man who had rarely faced genuine consequences, that the opposite of anger was forgiveness. That when the anger passed, the door would open. But there was no anger on the other side of that cockpit door. There never had been, not today, not at any point in these 12 hours. There was only a woman who had looked at the truth and chosen with complete deliberation exactly what to do with it. The aircraft descended through the early morning sky. Nathaniel felt the altitude dropping and felt something else dropping alongside it, the last of his certainty that this was something he could manage. 15 minutes to touchdown. Vanessa reached into her bag and took out her phone, ready for the moment. The wheels touched down and she could turn it back on and call for a car. Langford turned to a fresh page of his notepad and wrote one more line at the top. Patricia stood at the forward galley and looked at the cockpit door with the expression of a woman who had seen a great many things in 23 years and had enormous respect for the kind of strength that did not announce itself. And Captain Amelia Hart brought the aircraft in on the approach. Hands steady, eyes clear, the numbers exactly where they needed to be, and she flew it all the way down to the ground. The wheels touched at Dubai International Airport at 6:57 in the morning local time. Clean landing. Perfect. The kind you don't notice because nothing jolts and nothing shudders, and the transition from air to earth is so smooth, it feels like the two were always connected. That was how she had always flown. That was who she was. The aircraft taxied toward the gate. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The cabin filled immediately with the sound of people gathering themselves, phones turning on bags, shifting the ordinary noise of 286 people preparing to return to their lives. Nathaniel Pierce unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up and looked at the cockpit door. He waited. He was still waiting when Patricia at the forward galley opened the aircraft door and began the disembarkation process, and passengers began moving past her into the jetway. He was still waiting when Vanessa picked up her carry-on without a word and walked past him into the aisle and did not look back. He was still waiting when Richard Langford stood, buttoned his jacket, tucked his notepad into his inside breast pocket, and said as he passed seat 2, without stopping, without looking directly at Nathaniel, in a voice that was quiet enough that only Nathaniel could hear it. "Monday morning, Nathaniel. Have your people ready." Nathaniel's mouth went dry, and he was still waiting standing at the cockpit door when it finally opened. Amelia walked out. She was in her full uniform. Her captain's hat was on. Her bag was on her shoulder. Her face was composed in the way of a person who has completed something they were built to complete. She looked rested, which was perhaps the most devastating thing about her in that moment. She looked as though she had spent the last 12 hours doing exactly what she had been trained to do, which was, of course, precisely what she had done. She looked at him. For 1 second, 2, not with anger, not with tears, with the clear, complete, utterly settled look of a woman who has already landed. And then she walked past him. He said her name. Amelia. She did not turn around. She walked through the jetway door and into the terminal, and the door closed behind her, and Nathaniel Pierce stood alone in the forward section of an empty aircraft, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing he had ever heard. The door closed behind Amelia, and the sound it made was not loud. It was the quietest possible version of a door closing, which somehow made it worse. Nathaniel stood in the forward section of the empty aircraft for what felt like a long time, but was probably 30 seconds, and in those 30 seconds, something happened to him that he did not have a word for. It was not shame, exactly. It was not regret in the ordinary sense. It was something more structural than either of those, the feeling of a man who has been standing on a platform he believed was solid and has just looked down and discovered there is nothing beneath his feet, and has been standing on nothing for longer than he can calculate. He picked up his carry-on. He walked off the airplane. The jetway was empty. Amelia was already gone. He did not know which direction she had gone, which crew exit she had taken, which part of this enormous airport had absorbed her, and that not knowing felt like its own specific punishment, the punishment of a man who has lost the ability to locate someone he once knew entirely. He walked into the terminal and his phone found signal, and in the next 45 seconds it received 11 messages, which was normal for a man who had been unreachable for 12 hours, and he stood in the middle of the terminal reading them, and none of them were from Amelia. One was from his assistant. 3 were from clients. 2 were from his business partner, Marcus Webb, both marked urgent, both sent within the last 2 hours. And one sent 40 minutes ago was from a number he did not recognize, which turned out when he opened it to be from the office of a law firm he had never heard of. The message said, "Mr. Pierce, please be advised that effective immediately joint account number ending 4471 and joint account number ending 8829 have been placed under legal review pending divorce proceedings. You will be receiving formal documentation within 48 hours. Please do not attempt to access or transfer funds from these accounts. If you have questions, contact Margaret Ellis at Ellis & Associates." Nathaniel read it twice. Then he read it a third time. She had called a lawyer from inside the cockpit, or the moment she landed, which was, he checked the timestamp 31 minutes ago. She had walked off that aircraft, gone through crew security, found signal, and her first call had been to an attorney who had already begun moving. 31 minutes. He stood in the terminal with his carry-on at his feet and passengers streaming past him on both sides, and he felt the full architecture of his situation settle onto his shoulders all at once. She had not been angry on that flight. She had been preparing. Every hour of silence, every unreturned message through Patricia, every moment of apparent calm. She had been building. While he had been reacting and panicking and running through strategies that led nowhere, she had been doing what Amelia Hart always did when something needed to be handled. She had handled it. He called her. It went to voicemail after one ring, which meant she had declined the call manually, which meant she had seen his name on the screen and pressed a button. That was more deliberate than not answering. That was a choice. He called again. Same thing. One ring. Voicemail. He put the phone in his pocket and stood very still and thought about what to do next. What he did next was find a hotel car because there was nothing else to do and sit in the back of it as it moved through the early Dubai morning and stare out the window at a city he had planned to enjoy very differently than this and feel the specific and unfamiliar sensation of being completely without a next move. The hotel room was large and well-appointed and entirely without comfort. He set his bag down and sat on the edge of the bed and called Marcus Webb. Marcus picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting. "Nate." His voice was careful. Marcus had known Nathaniel for 9 years. Careful was not his default register with him. "What's happening?" Nathaniel said. Not a question, a statement. The kind that means, tell me what I already know is bad. "Langford called me," Marcus said, "an hour ago." Nathaniel closed his eyes. "He's launching an audit," Marcus said. "Full review. He's pulling his seat on the advisory board pending the outcome, and he's notified the other 2 primary investors." A pause. "Nate, what happened on that flight?" "It's complicated." An audit is not complicated. An audit is the opposite of complicated. An audit is the most specific and legible thing that can happen to a business. Marcus's voice had an edge now under the careful. "He said something about Dubai. He said the trip was on the corporate card. Was it? Silence. Was the trip on the corporate card, Nathaniel? I was going to reconcile it. The silence on Marcus's end was the silence of a man performing a significant amount of restraint. Okay, Marcus said finally. Okay. Don't do anything. Don't move any money. Don't call Langford. Don't call the investors. Let me talk to our attorney first and find out where we actually stand. It's not... I said don't do anything. And then more quietly, in the voice of a man who has been friends with someone long enough to say the hard thing, is it just the Dubai trip? Another silence. Nate. There are some other items, Nathaniel said, that might need to be recategorized. The breath Marcus let out was long and controlled and said everything it needed to say without using any words at all. I'll call you in 2 hours, Marcus said, and hung up. Nathaniel set the phone on the bed and looked at the wall. He thought about Monday morning, Langford's voice in the jetway. Have your people ready. He thought about Margaret Ellis and her 48-hour timeline. He thought about Amelia walking past him in full uniform without turning around, and the way the cockpit door had swung shut after her and the silence that had followed. And then because he was still Nathaniel Pierce and could not entirely stop being himself, even in the middle of his own collapse, he thought, there is still a way out of this. There is always a way out. I just need to find the right angle. He picked up the phone again. He called Amelia again. One ring. Voicemail. He left a message this time. His voice was controlled and measured, and hit every note he intended it to hit, not begging, not aggressive, just honest. Or the version of honest that he was capable of performing when he needed something. Amelia, I know you don't want to talk right now. I understand that. I'm not asking you to forgive me or to have a conversation you're not ready for. I just want you to know that I know I was wrong. I know what I did, and I'm asking you as someone who has been in your life for 11 years to give me a chance to sit down with you before you make decisions that we can't take back. That's all I'm asking. Just call me back. He ended the call. He set the phone face up on the bed and looked at it. It did not ring. It did not light up. It sat on the bed in the large, well-appointed hotel room and said nothing. Across the city in a different hotel, Amelia was sitting across from her laptop with a cup of actual hot coffee and her reading glasses on and a video call open with Margaret Ellis, who was in New York where it was late at night and who had clearly not been to sleep yet, and who was walking her through documents with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before and done it well. The joint accounts are frozen pending review, Margaret said. He can't touch them. The credit card accounts are flagged. I've requested 30 days of transaction history going back 18 months on the corporate card connected to Pierce Consulting. He used the corporate card for this trip, Amelia said. I know. It's in the booking record you sent me from the aircraft. Margaret paused. Amelia, that was fast thinking. The booking record, the payment chain, that's exactly what we need. I had 12 hours, Amelia said simply. Margaret almost smiled. You did. She made a note. I also want to talk to you about the joint investment accounts, the ones connected to Pierce Consulting's expansion fund. Amelia looked up. What about them? There are 4 accounts with joint marital asset classifications that were used as partial collateral for the fund. If the fund becomes subject to audit or legal action, those assets could be at risk. She said it evenly, not to alarm, but to inform. I want to get ahead of that before anything is filed. Amelia was quiet for a moment. How far ahead? As far ahead as we can get in the next 48 hours. Do it, Amelia said. There's one more thing. Margaret set down her pen, which was the thing she did when she was moving from document to something more personal. Are you all right? And I don't mean professionally. Amelia took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk and looked at the screen. I'm functional, she said honestly. I'll be all right. Right now I'm functional. That's enough, Margaret said. That's actually exactly enough for right now. They finished the call 40 minutes later with a plan that was specific and documented and left very little to chance. Amelia closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of the hotel room and drank the rest of her coffee. She let herself feel for approximately 10 minutes the full weight of the day. The morning in the kitchen, the manifest, the booking record. Nathaniel's name in 2A and a woman registered as Mrs. Pierce in 2B. Richard Langford's 4 pages of notes. Patricia standing in the cockpit doorway, asking if there was anything she needed, not professionally. Daniel Reyes saying nothing and being right to say nothing, and being exactly the co-pilot she needed. She thought about the voicemail Nathaniel had left. She had listened to it once, standing in the hotel corridor, before she entered her room with her bag over her shoulder and her captain's hat still on. She had listened to the whole thing because she was a person who believed in full information. She had been moved by exactly none of it. Not because she was cold. She was not cold. She felt things as thoroughly and honestly as she ever had, perhaps more so today than almost any other day she could name. But feeling something and being moved to action by it were different, and she knew the difference, and Nathaniel's voicemail was what it was. A performance of honesty rather than honesty itself, delivered by a man who had never quite understood that she could hear the difference. 12 years of knowing a voice. She had always known his, too. She set the coffee cup down. She opened her phone and texted Margaret. "One more thing. Check whether the Langford Investment Fund uses any accounts I have signatory authority on. If so, I want off them before Monday." Margaret's response came in 4 minutes. "Already on it. You think of everything." Amelia put the phone down and lay back on the bed, still in her uniform, and looked at the ceiling. She thought about the landing. Clean. Smooth. Exactly right. She thought I flew it all the way down to the ground. And then she closed her eyes, and for the first time in 16 hours, she slept. 3 time zones away, Vanessa Vale was on a different flight. She had booked it herself at the gate before Nathaniel had even cleared customs, a connection through Frankfurt to JFK business class paid with her own card under her own name. Not Mrs. Pierce. Not anyone's wife. Vanessa Vale traveling alone, returning to a life she needed to look at honestly when she got back. She had not called Nathaniel. She had not texted him. She had sent one message to a friend in New York, a woman named Cheryl, who had over the past 8 months made several pointed comments about Nathaniel that Vanessa had deflected each time with the practiced ease of a person who does not want to hear what they already know. The message said, "You were right. I'll explain when I land. I'm okay." Cheryl's response was, "I know you are. I'm picking you up." Vanessa put the phone away and leaned her head back and thought about what she had said to Nathaniel on the aircraft. What kind of woman does that, finds out what she finds out and just keeps flying? She had meant it as an observation. Now thinking about it with the specific clarity that comes after a decision has been made and the emotion has settled, it felt like more than that. It felt like a question she needed to ask herself, not about Amelia, about herself. What kind of woman did she want to be? The kind who saw the truth and kept flying, or the kind who had spent 8 months choosing not to see it because the alternative was uncomfortable? She knew the answer. The plane took off and she watched the city fall away below, and she thought, "This is the last time I do something like this, the last time I let someone else's story swallow mine." She meant it. And she was the kind of woman who, when she meant something, held on to it. Back in Dubai, in a hotel room across the city, Nathaniel Pierce's phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. He had been awake since 6. He had ordered room service he hadn't eaten and made 4 calls that hadn't resolved anything, and stared at a phone that would not ring with the one call he needed. It was Marcus. "I talked to the attorney," Marcus said. His voice had changed. The careful edge was gone. What was underneath it was not gentle. "Nate, I need you to listen to me very specifically." "I'm listening." "Langford's audit team is already pulling records. Our attorney has reviewed the expense categorizations you described to me this morning, and her assessment is that 3 of them constitute misuse of investor funds under the terms of the partnership agreement." A pause. "That's not a gray area, Nate. That's not a recategorization issue. That's a breach." Nathaniel felt the room tilt slightly. "That's not Marcus. Those were judgment calls about business expenses that—" "They were not judgment calls." Marcus's voice was flat now, the way a wall is flat. "A judgment call is expensing a dinner that might have been personal. A judgment call is not billing a romantic trip to Dubai under international business development." Another pause. "And before you tell me again that you were going to reconcile it, I need you to understand that reconciling it after the fact is not the same as not having done it, and our attorney agrees." Nathaniel was silent. "There's more," Marcus said. "More." Amelia's attorney Ellis, she's already been in contact with our attorney. She's requesting full financial disclosure on the joint marital assets, which includes the accounts used as collateral for the fund. A beat. She filed this morning, Nate. She filed before you were through customs. The room tilted again more severely this time. She was on a 12-hour flight, Nathaniel said, not quite able to stop himself. I know, Marcus said. Apparently she used the time productively. The thing in Nathaniel's chest that had been building since 6:57 this morning, since the clean landing, since the door, since Amelia's face for 1 second, and then the back of her head, and then nothing, that thing cracked. He sat down on the edge of the bed. Marcus, he said. Yeah. Am I? He stopped. He tried again. How bad is this? The pause before Marcus answered was long enough to be its own answer. I'm not going to tell you it's fine, Marcus said. It's not fine. The business side is serious, and the personal side is serious, and you need to stop trying to manage them separately because they're not separate anymore. He exhaled. What I will tell you is that you need to get on a plane back to New York and sit down with an attorney, not mine, your own personal attorney, before anything else happens. And you need to stop calling Amelia. I need to talk to her. Nate. Marcus's voice was for a moment stripped of everything professional and simply human. They had been friends for 9 years. The friendship was probably not going to survive this, and they both knew it, but it had not ended yet. She doesn't want to talk to you. She had 12 hours, and she didn't use a single one of them to call you. She got off that plane and called a lawyer. She is not waiting for a conversation. There is no version of a phone call you can make right now that helps you, and there are several that hurt you. Stop calling. Nathaniel sat with that for a long moment. Okay, he said. Okay, Marcus said. And then, I'm sorry. For what it's worth. I'm sorry this happened. Which part? A silence. All of it, Marcus said, and hung up. Nathaniel set the phone down very carefully on the bed, as though it were fragile, as though the call it had just delivered might somehow reverse itself if he handled it gently enough. Then he lay down on the hotel bed in his clothes and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the timeline Marcus had described. Amelia had filed before he was through customs. She had been in a hotel room with her attorney while he was sitting in the back of a car thinking there was still a way out. She had sent the booking records from the aircraft. She had secured the accounts before she landed. She had known from the moment she saw his name on that manifest exactly what she was going to do. Every hour of the flight, every minute of those 12 hours. She had been building the case while he was pressed against his seat, looking at a cockpit door that was never going to open for him. He thought about what he had said that morning in the kitchen. That's great. Really. You've been waiting for this one. He had said those words knowing he was about to board her aircraft with another woman. He had said them and felt at the time almost nothing. A small flicker of something, not guilt, not conscience, more like the mild awareness of a proximity that he had immediately decided was not his problem. He had been so certain that it was not his problem. He turned his face toward the window. Outside, Dubai was doing what Dubai did in the early afternoon, bright and fast and completely indifferent to any individual person's interior weather. He thought about 11 years. The apartment in Manhattan, the dinners with friends, the maple trees upstate and the lopsided cake, the way she had looked at him when she still looked at him with the particular quality of a person who had chosen you not because you were the only option, but because you were the one she wanted. He had taken that look for granted so thoroughly that he had forgotten it was not permanent, that it was in fact something earned and maintained and capable of being lost. It was lost. He understood that now with a clarity that arrived too late to be useful for anything except grief. He thought about Langford's voice. Monday morning. Have your people ready. He thought about Margaret Ellis and the 48-hour clock. He thought about Vanessa, who had walked past him in the aisle without looking back, who had called him out with a quiet precision that still rang in his ears. Did you put my name in as your wife? Everyone he realized had seen him more clearly than he had seen himself. He had built an image of a successful man, a confident man, a man who controlled the variables. He had tended to that image with enormous care and considerable skill for a very long time. And on one Tuesday morning in one terminal on one flight to Dubai, the whole architecture of it had walked into a cockpit and closed the door. His phone buzzed. He grabbed it. It was not Amelia. It was a notification from his banking app informing him that joint account ending 4471 was now restricted. He set the phone back down. He thought about the note Amelia would write. He didn't know that she was writing one yet, but he knew her, and he knew that when she had something final to say, she wrote it. She had always been a writer in the private sense, not for anyone else but for herself, as a way of making things concrete and finished. She would write something. He was certain of it. He did not know what it would say. He would find out, he supposed, when he got back to New York. He booked a flight, Friday morning. 3 days from now, which was the earliest he could arrange given the meetings Marcus had told him he needed to take, first the attorney, a conversation with the business partner in the Dubai office, who was connected to the expansion fund and who was going to need to be briefed before Langford's audit team reached out. 3 days. He had spent 3 days in this city, imagining the trip would go completely differently. He thought about Amelia sleeping somewhere in this city in a hotel room he would never find in the deep, specific sleep of a person who has done exactly what they came to do. He thought she landed the airplane. He thought she landed it perfectly, and she walked away, and she didn't turn around. And he lay on the hotel bed in his expensive clothes in his well-appointed room and felt for the first time in a very long time the full and unmediated weight of everything he had traded away, and he did not sleep at all. Amelia slept for 6 hours and woke up knowing exactly where she was. That was not always the case after long international flights. There were mornings in hotel rooms in Frankfurt, in Singapore, and Sao Paulo, where the first 30 seconds of consciousness were a kind of geographic confusion, the ceiling wrong, the light wrong, the sounds from outside suggesting a city she had to identify before she could fully inhabit herself again. It was an occupational condition she had made peace with years ago. This morning there was no confusion. She was in Dubai. She knew why she was here. She knew what she had done before she slept and what she needed to do when she got up. She lay still for exactly 1 minute, looking at the ceiling, letting the full weight of her situation settle onto her chest, the way it did every morning when something large was happening in your life, not crashing down, not overwhelming, but present, insisting on being acknowledged. She acknowledged it. Then she got up. She had 3 days in Dubai before her return flight. The airline provided hotel accommodation for crew on layovers of this length, which meant she had a room A per diem and no professional obligations until Friday morning. Under any other circumstances, she would have used at least one of those days to see the city. She had been to Dubai 4 times and still had a list of things she had never gotten to. Under these circumstances, she opened her laptop, made coffee from the in-room machine, and called Margaret Ellis at 7 a.m. Dubai time, which was 11 the previous night in New York, and Margaret answered on the second ring. "I was waiting," Margaret said. "I know. I'm sorry for the hour." "Don't be. This is what I do." Papers shuffling on the other end. "I have updates." "Tell me." The financial disclosure request has been formally filed. His attorney, a man named Gerald Farrow, corporate specialist, which is interesting because you'd expect a family attorney for a divorce filing, which tells me he's more worried about the business side than the personal side, right now has acknowledged receipt and requested a 10-day extension to compile records. Amelia absorbed that. "Did you grant it?" "5 days," Margaret said. "I'm not in the habit of giving people extra time to organize their defenses. 5 days is reasonable, and anything less looks aggressive in front of a judge." A pause. "Here's what's more interesting. I received a call this morning from an attorney representing Richard Langford." Amelia set her coffee down. "Why is Langford's attorney calling you?" "Because Langford's audit has already turned up enough in 48 hours to confirm what he suspected on the flight. The corporate card misuse is documented. He's filing a formal breach of partnership complaint against Pierce Consulting, which means the expansion fund is going to be frozen pending investigation." Margaret's voice was precise and even the voice of someone delivering information that is serious but manageable because it has been fully understood. "Langford's attorney contacted me because 2 of the joint marital accounts we flagged were used as partial collateral for the fund. He wanted to ensure we were aware before the freeze was formalized so we could take protective action. And have we?" "I filed the protective motion at 9 this morning. The accounts are ring-fenced. Whatever happens to the fund, your personal assets are separated." Another pause. Langford, for what it's worth, is being cooperative in a way that suggests he feels personally responsible for not catching this sooner. His attorney used the phrase, extending every professional courtesy. In my experience, that means he feels guilty. Amelia thought about the man in 3A. 4 pages of notes on a notepad. Black coffee. The quiet, controlled fury of a man who had trusted someone with $4 million and was now understanding how that trust had been spent. He shouldn't feel guilty, she said. He was deceived. Most people who end up in these situations were deceived, Margaret said. That doesn't stop them from feeling responsible. It's a very human reaction. She paused. How are you? Functional, Amelia said, the same word she had used the night before. Still functional. Good. Margaret did not push it. She had been a family attorney for 22 years, and she had learned the difference between a client who needed to talk and a client who needed to act, and Amelia Hart was categorically the second kind. I want to talk about the apartment. Tell me. It's in both names. You have equal right of occupancy. I'd like you to consider when you return to New York going directly to the apartment before he does. Not to confront him, to document. Document what? Everything. Photographs of the space, any shared property of significant value, art, furniture items purchased jointly, any documents in the apartment that pertain to the business or finances. If there are hard copies of anything related to Pierce Consulting contracts, receipts, correspondence, I want to know about them before Gerald Farrow does. Amelia was quiet for a moment. She was thinking about the apartment, the photographs on the walls, the bookshelf they had argued about because she wanted it in the living room and he wanted it in the study, and they had compromised on a spot that was technically neither. The coffee maker she had bought, and he had claimed because he used it more. All of it. The accumulated physical evidence of 11 years. When does he land in New York? She asked. His flight is Friday's morning based on what I've been able to determine from public booking records. You land Thursday evening. So I have a window. Approximately 14 hours, Margaret said. If you want to use it. I'll use it, Amelia said. There was a brief silence that held something like respect. I'll have a full checklist to you by this afternoon, Margaret said. They ended the call. Amelia sat with her coffee and thought about Thursday, about walking into the apartment that had been hers and Nathaniel's for 7 years and moving through it with a camera and a clear head, about what it would feel like to document the evidence of a life that was already over. She thought, it will feel like exactly what it is, and I will do it anyway. She finished her coffee and opened her laptop and began writing. Not the note, not yet. That would come later when she was back in New York, and the legal machinery was in motion, and she had said everything that needed to be said through the proper channels. What she wrote now was for herself, a private accounting, the kind she had always done after difficult flights, not a report, not documentation, just an honest record of what had happened and what she had felt and what she had decided. A way of making things real by putting them in words. A habit she had developed so long ago that she could not remember starting it. She wrote for 40 minutes. She did not edit. She did not reread. When she finished, she closed the document and sat back and felt not better exactly, but cleaner, more defined at the edges, more herself. That was what writing always did for her. She showered, put on civilian clothes, and went to find breakfast. She realized as she stepped into the elevator, genuinely hungry for the first time since yesterday morning. That seemed like a good sign. In New York, the city was doing what New York does in the morning, loudly, indifferently, without regard for anyone's personal crisis. Marcus Webb was sitting in his office on the 41st floor of a building in Midtown, looking at a document his attorney had sent him at 6 a.m., and feeling the specific sensation of a man who has watched something he built beginning to come apart and is trying to calculate exactly how much of it can be saved. His phone rang. It was one of the secondary investors in the expansion fund, a man named Thomas Reeves, quiet, careful, the kind of investor who did not call unless something had already moved past the point of casual concern. Thomas, Marcus said. I got a call from Langford's office last night, Thomas said. He did not bother with preamble. Neither of them were preamble people, which was part of why they had worked together successfully for a long time. They're freezing the fund pending audit. I've been on the phone with my attorney since 6 this morning. I know, Marcus said. I'm in the same position. How bad is it? Marcus picked up his pen and set it down again. I don't know the full extent yet. Langford's team has been faster than I expected. They've already documented the corporate card situation, which is the Dubai trip is the obvious one, but there may be others. Maybe, Thomas repeated, with a flatness that communicated precisely what he thought of that phrase. There are others, Marcus said. He had decided sometime around 4 a.m. that the only viable path through this was complete honesty with the people who deserved it. I didn't know the scope of it when it was happening. I want to be clear about that. I was not aware of specific transactions, but I should have been, and that's a failure of oversight on my part, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. A silence. I appreciate that, Thomas said, and meant it in the way that people mean things when the situation has already passed, the point where anything less than sincerity is useful. What's the path forward? Full cooperation with Langford's audit, full financial disclosure. Our attorneys are coordinating, and... Marcus paused. Nathaniel is returning Friday. I'll be meeting with him directly. Whatever needs to be addressed, we address it. No more creativity with categorization. Thomas said, and his wife's attorney, Ellis & Associates. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Also in contact with Langford's team. They're coordinating the protective filings on the marital assets. So everyone is coordinating, Thomas said, except Nathaniel. Nathaniel, Marcus said carefully, is in Dubai. Another silence heavier than the first. All right, Thomas said. Keep me informed. Daily updates from your attorney to mine. And then, before he hung up, Marcus, I've known you a long time. I know this isn't on you, but I need you to understand that when this is resolved, however it resolves the way it's resolved is going to determine a lot of things about what comes next, for all of us. I understand, Marcus said. Good, Thomas said, and hung up. Marcus sat in his office for a long moment. Then he called his personal attorney and said, I need you to do something for me that's outside the scope of the business situation. I need you to find out how quickly I can restructure my partnership agreement to separate my liability from Nathaniel Pierce's decisions going forward. A pause. Retroactively, if possible. His attorney said he would look into it. Marcus said thank you and hung up and sat back in his chair and looked out at the New York skyline and thought about 9 years of friendship and the specific, irreversible way trust breaks, not with drama, but quietly in a hotel room in Dubai. While the person you trusted is making phone calls and ordering room service, they don't eat. Thursday evening, JFK International Airport, 7:42 p.m. Amelia came through arrivals on the domestic side. She had positioned herself on a connecting flight from Dubai, rather than the direct return, which was faster, and which gave her the Thursday evening window that Margaret had identified. She had her carry-on and her captain's bag and the kind of steady, purposeful walk that belongs to people who know exactly where they are going. Her phone had been on since the layover in London, which meant she had been managing messages and calls for 9 hours. Margaret's checklist had arrived as promised. The protective filings were in order. The apartment documentation plan was confirmed. She had also, in a London airport coffee shop between connections, received a text from Patricia. It said, Captain, I hope you're well. I want you to know that the crew from 247 has discussed what we observed on that flight and unanimously agreed to provide written statements if they are ever needed. You have our full support. Take good care of yourself. Amelia had read it twice. She had typed back, Thank you, Patricia. That means more than I can say. And she had meant every word of it with a completeness that surprised her, and then she had put the phone in her pocket and sat with it for a moment before she got on her next flight. She had people. She had always had people. She had just not always remembered to count them. The car Margaret had arranged was waiting at arrivals. The driver held a sign with her name on it. Not Mrs. Pierce. Not Captain Pierce. Her name. Her actual name. Captain Amelia Hart. She got in. They drove toward Manhattan through the particular Thursday evening traffic that belongs to a city that never stops moving, and Amelia sat in the back seat and looked at the skyline as it came into view, and felt underneath everything a very specific and uncomplicated thing. She was home. Not because of the apartment, not because of anything connected to Nathaniel or the marriage or the life they had shared in this city, But because New York was where she flew from, and the airport was where her crews were, and the sky above this city was as familiar to her as any sky in the world, this was hers. The apartment took 45 minutes to document. She moved through it methodically, following Margaret's checklist, photographing every room and every item of shared value and every document she found in the desk drawer in the study that pertained to Pierce Consulting. There were more of those than she expected. Printed contracts, physical receipts, a folder labeled simply with the year that turned out to contain when she opened it, a set of expense reports that had been printed, and then she could see the mark of it partially redacted with a black marker before being reprinted. Someone had been reviewing their own records and cleaning them, tidying the paper trail. She photographed every page. She texted the photographs to Margaret with the message, "Study desk, bottom right drawer. He's been cleaning the records. You'll want to see these." Margaret's response came in 8 minutes. "I see them. Do not remove them from the apartment. We'll subpoena the originals." "This is significant, Amelia." She put the folder back exactly where she had found it. She stood in the center of the apartment that had been her home for 7 years and looked at it with clear eyes. The photographs on the walls, their trip to Portugal, the upstate wedding, a print she had bought in Copenhagen that she had always loved and he had merely tolerated. The bookshelf in the compromise spot, the coffee maker she had bought. She took the Copenhagen print off the wall. It was hers, had always been hers, and she was not leaving it. She wrapped it carefully in a sweater from her carry-on and tucked it under her arm. Then she sat down at the dining table. Their dining table, the one they had argued about in a furniture store in Brooklyn, because she wanted the round one and he wanted the rectangular one, and they had ended up with the rectangular one, and she had never quite loved it, and she took out a piece of paper and a pen. She wrote for 12 minutes. When she finished, she read it back once. She folded it in thirds and placed it in an envelope that she found in the same desk drawer she had documented an hour ago, and she wrote his name on the front, and she set it in the center of the table. Then she picked up her carry-on and the Copenhagen print and her captain's bag, and she left the apartment for the last time. She did not look back. She had already decided where she was going. A friend from the airline, a woman named Grace, who had been her closest friend in aviation for 6 years, who had a spare room and strong coffee and the particular quality of presence that asks nothing and offers everything, had already confirmed the room was ready. Amelia texted her from the elevator, "I'm on my way." Grace texted back, "Doors open. Coffee's on." Friday morning, 9:17 a.m. Nathaniel Pierce came through his own front door with jet lag and a sense of dread that had been building since Dubai and had reached, by the time his key turned in the lock, something close to physical weight. The apartment was quiet, clean, exactly as he had left it almost a week ago, except for 2 things he noticed immediately. The Copenhagen print was gone. The pale rectangle on the wall where it had hung was obvious in the morning light. And there was an envelope on the dining table with his name on it. He set his bag down. He crossed to the table. He stood over the envelope for a moment, not picking it up, knowing that whatever was inside it represented something that could not be undone once he had read it. Then he picked it up and opened it. There were 3 things inside. The first was a set of papers printed and properly formatted that his mind identified before he could stop it as divorce filings. Formal, complete, Margaret Ellis's contact information at the top. The second was a document that he recognized with a cold shock as a summary of the financial evidence Margaret's team had compiled, the booking records from Flight 247, the joint account transactions, the corporate card history, the expense reports from the study drawer photographed and time-stamped. He stood at the table reading the second document for a long time. He had not known about the study drawer. He had not known she had been in the apartment. The expense reports he had partially cleaned. He had believed until this moment that the incomplete versions were not incriminating enough to be serious. Looking at the photographs of them now, organized into a timeline by someone who clearly understood exactly what they were looking at, he understood that he had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about a great many things. The third thing in the envelope was a piece of paper folded separately from the documents, handwritten. Her handwriting clean and precise, the handwriting of someone who had learned early that clarity on paper could be a survival skill. He unfolded it. It was short, 7 sentences. He read it once and then he set it on the table, and he could not read it again yet. So he stood with his hands flat on the table and looked at it. It said, You boarded that plane with her. I landed without you. Everything I built before you decided to stop seeing it. I am not leaving because I lost. I am leaving because I have finally been honest with myself about what I was staying for. The woman whose name you put on that reservation was never as distant as you needed her to be. She was just busy flying. He stood at the table for a long time. His phone rang. It was Gerald Farrow, his attorney. He answered it. "Nathaniel," Gerald said, "we need to talk about the financial disclosure. Ellis has filed a comprehensive asset summary, and I have to be honest with you, she's been thorough in a way that leaves us very little room to contest the marital asset classifications. The study drawer documents in particular." "I know," Nathaniel said. A pause. "You know?" "She was in the apartment. She documented everything." He looked at the envelope on the table. "She told me." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "She left you documentation of what she found." "In the divorce filing." Another pause longer. "That is either the most confident legal move I've seen in 20 years or the most personal one." He said it with something that was not quite admiration and not quite sympathy. "Possibly both." "Both," Nathaniel said. "Definitely both." Langford's audit results landed in Marcus Webb's inbox at 11:47 that same morning. Marcus read the executive summary in his office with the door closed and the kind of focused attention that a person gives to something they already know is bad but need to understand precisely. He read it twice. He made notes on a legal pad. He underlined 3 figures. Then he called Thomas Reeves. "I have the summary," Thomas said before Marcus could speak. "I've read it." "Then you know." "I know." A pause. "It's not catastrophic for the fund itself. Langford's team has confirmed the core investments are sound. The misuse was in the administrative layer expenses, disbursements, the Dubai situation." He paused again. "But it's enough for a formal breach claim, and it's enough for whatever Ellis needs on the personal side." "Yes," Marcus said. "What's Nathaniel saying?" "Nothing yet. He's been in contact with Gerald Farrow, but Farrow is managing the communication right now." Marcus set down his pen. "Tom, the partnership agreement restructure I mentioned, my attorney believes we can proceed with it." Thomas was quiet. "You're separating yourself from the liability." "I'm separating myself from future liability. I can't undo the past exposure, but I can ensure that anything that comes after this is clearly delineated." He said it evenly without apology. "It's not personal. It's what has to happen." "I know," Thomas said. "I'm doing the same thing." There was a silence between them that held underneath its professionalism something genuinely sad. They had both believed in the version of Nathaniel Pierce that had existed or that they had thought existed, and they were now in the process of organizing their lives around the understanding that version had been a performance. That was not a quick thing to metabolize. It had a weight that business language didn't quite cover. "All right," Marcus said. "Daily updates. Let's get through this cleanly." "Agreed," Thomas said. They hung up. Marcus sat in his office on the 41st floor and looked at the New York skyline and thought about the 9 years. He thought about the first time he had met Nathaniel, a conference in Chicago, a man with a vision and a handshake that felt like it meant something. He thought about the early years of the business when things had been genuinely good, when the work was real and the results were real, and Nathaniel had been, as far as Marcus could tell, the person he presented himself as. He thought, when did it change? He thought, maybe it didn't change. Maybe it just became more visible. That was perhaps the most unsettling thought of all. Not that Nathaniel had become someone different, but that he had always been capable of this and had simply for a long time chosen not to need to be. Marcus pulled up a new document on his computer and began drafting the internal communication he would need to send to the broader team by end of day. He kept it factual, clear, and brief. He was not going to editorialize. He was not going to manage anyone's feelings about it. He was going to tell the truth in the plainest language available and let people respond to the truth as they needed to. He was tired of managing narratives. It turned out to be contagious, the truth-telling. Not immediately, not in the way of a sudden conversion, But gradually the way dawn comes, the way it had come over the Atlantic on a morning 6 days ago, when a captain had brought an aircraft in from the east, and the sky had turned gold and everything had been briefly, completely clear. Vanessa Vale was sitting in Cheryl's kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after she had landed at JFK, and she was telling the truth about the last 8 months, in a way she had not been able to. The first time she had tried to tell it the night she got back, when she had been too close to it, and too tired, and the words had come out defended and partial. Now they came out whole. "I knew," she said. "Not with drama, just plainly. I didn't know everything, but I knew enough. I knew he was telling me a version of things that was designed to make me comfortable, and I chose to be comfortable." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I'm not saying he's not responsible for what he did. He is. But I had signals, and I ignored them." Cheryl, who had the great gift of knowing when to speak and when to simply be present, said, "What are you going to do with that?" Vanessa thought about it honestly. "Be better," she said. "Not punish myself, just be better about what I'm willing to see." Cheryl nodded. "That's a good answer." "I keep thinking about her," Vanessa said. "His wife, the pilot." She paused. She found out at 37,000 feet in the middle of her biggest professional day, and she just kept doing her job. She didn't fall apart. She didn't confront him. She just quietly made everything ready. "That's remarkable," Cheryl said. "It's more than remarkable," Vanessa said. "It's the thing I want to be capable of. Not the situation, never the situation. But that quality, that complete refusal to let someone else's choices become the thing that defines your moment." She was quiet for a second. "I want to be that steady." Cheryl looked at her for a moment. "I think you're closer to it than you know," she said. Vanessa shook her head slightly, but she did not argue. And in an apartment in Manhattan, Nathaniel Pierce sat at his rectangular dining table, the one she had never quite loved, the one he had insisted on in a furniture store in Brooklyn a long time ago, with the divorce papers and the financial summary and the handwritten note arranged in front of him like a verdict, and he read the last line one more time. She was just busy flying. He put the note down. He looked at the wall where the Copenhagen print had been. He picked up his phone and called Gerald Farrow and said in a voice that was quieter than it had ever been in a legal conversation, "Gerald, I want to talk about a clean settlement. No contest, no drawn-out process. Whatever she needs to make this fair, I want to give her that." Gerald was silent for a moment. "That's a significant change of position from this morning." "I read her note," Nathaniel said simply. Another pause. "All right," Gerald said. "I'll call Ellis." Nathaniel set the phone down. He sat at the table in the quiet apartment, and he looked at the empty wall, and he felt the full, unmediated truth of what he had lost. And for the first time since Dubai, he did not reach for a strategy or a next move or a better angle. He just sat with it. He owed her that much. He owed her the honesty of sitting with it, even if she would never know he had. Gerald Farrow called Margaret Ellis on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after Flight 247 had touched down in Dubai, and the conversation lasted 11 minutes. Margaret told Amelia about it that afternoon over the phone, and Amelia sat in Grace's spare room with her legs crossed on the bed and listened without interrupting, which was something she had always been good at, the discipline of hearing things fully before responding to them. "He's offering a clean settlement," Margaret said. "No contest. Full financial disclosure, no resistance to the asset division, and he's agreed in principle to the terms we outlined in the initial filing." A pause. "He also, and this is unusual, Amelia, I want you to know, this doesn't happen often. He waived the standard 30-day response window. Gerald called it a change of position, said Nathaniel read your note." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "The note did that," she said. "Apparently," Margaret said. "Which tells you something about the note." Amelia thought about those 7 sentences. She had written them in 12 minutes at a rectangular dining table she had never quite loved, and she had not edited them, and she had not second-guessed them because they were simply true. And truth written plainly tends to land harder than anything constructed to wound. She had not written it to wound him. She had written it because she needed to say it, and because some things need to be said in writing to become fully real, and because she had spent 11 years with a man who was very skilled at talking, and she had wanted at the end of it to have the last word in a form he could not interrupt or reframe. She had not expected it to change anything. "What do we do now?" she said. "We review the disclosure documents when they arrive, verify the asset division is accurate and complete, and file the finalized agreement with the court," Margaret said. "If everything is as clean as Gerald is suggesting, we could be looking at a final decree in 60 to 90 days. 60 to 90 days. 11 years and 60 to 90 days. All right, Amelia said. Let's move. I'll be in touch the moment the documents arrive." Margaret paused. "One more thing. The Langford audit concluded this morning. Their findings have been formally filed. It's going to be public record." Amelia absorbed that. "Is it bad?" "For Pierce Consulting, yes. For you personally, no. Margaret's team made sure of that. Your assets are clean, your name is clean, and Langford's attorney has formally noted in the filing that you cooperated fully with protective measures the moment you became aware of the situation." Another pause. "The filing actually references the flight, the date, the route, the fact that protective action was initiated within hours of landing." "Within 31 minutes, Amelia said quietly. Margaret almost laughed. "Within 31 minutes, she agreed, "which is in the public record now." Amelia sat with that for a moment. The public record. Something about the precision of it felt right. Not vengeful, she had never wanted public exposure of him, but accurate. The record would reflect what had actually happened to a woman who had discovered a betrayal at altitude and had responded not with chaos, but with complete methodical precision. That was the truth. The record could hold it. "Thank you, Margaret," she said. "Thank you for being the kind of client who makes my job easier," Margaret said. "That's rarer than you'd think." They ended the call. Amelia sat in Grace's spare room for a while after that, not thinking about Nathaniel or the settlement or the 60 to 90 days. She was thinking about flying. She had a New York to London assignment in 4 days, and she had been reviewing the route updates that morning, and there was a low-pressure system over Iceland that she was watching with professional interest. Nothing dangerous, just something to track. The way you tracked all the variables that made up the picture of a flight weather fuel routing crew, the 100 small factors that combined into either smooth air or something you had to navigate through. She was good at navigating. She had always been good at it. She picked up her phone and called Daniel Reyes. He answered on the third ring, and she could hear the background noise of an airport behind him. "Captain Hart," he said, and she could hear in his voice that he was genuinely glad to hear from her. "Where are you?" she said. "Frankfurt layover. 4 hours. I was about to find coffee." A pause. "How are you doing? And I mean actually." "Actually," she said, "I think I'm okay. I think I'm more than okay. I'm just not completely sure yet." "That's honest," he said. "I've been practicing honesty. It turns out it gets easier." He laughed, and it was a real laugh, unguarded and warm. "I wanted to say what you did on that flight. I've flown with a lot of captains, Amelia, a lot of good ones. I've never seen anyone hold it together the way you did, not like that." She felt something move in her chest. Not pride exactly, something quieter and more lasting than pride. "I had a good co-pilot," she said. "You had a good captain," he said. "I just tried to stay out of the way." They talked for a few minutes more about the London route, about a mutual colleague who had just been promoted, about the Iceland low-pressure system that Daniel had also been watching. Easy, professional, real. The conversation of people who respect each other and show it by talking about the work. When she hung up, she felt the thing that had been quietly accumulating for the past 3 weeks become more defined. It was not happiness exactly, not yet. But it was its close relative, the sense of a life that is moving in the right direction, that has shed what needed to be shed and kept what was worth keeping, and is now tentatively but genuinely pointing toward open sky. 4 weeks after the flight, the settlement documents arrived. Margaret and Amelia sat across from each other in Margaret's office on a Thursday afternoon and went through them page by page, which took 2 hours and 40 minutes and a pot of coffee. Margaret had a yellow highlighter and a red pen and the focused attention of a woman who trusted nothing she hadn't personally verified, which was precisely what Amelia needed. The disclosure was complete. The asset division was fair, which was to say it was accurate. Everything Amelia had contributed was accounted for everything. Joint was divided cleanly, and the Pierce Consulting exposure had been fully separated from her personal finances through the protective filings Margaret had moved on in Dubai. There was one moment somewhere around page 37 when Amelia saw the value of the joint retirement account they had been building for 9 years, and the number made something in her go briefly, quietly still. Margaret noticed. She said nothing, just gave it a beat. Then Amelia turned the page and kept reading. When they finished, Margaret set down her highlighter and looked at Amelia directly. "It's clean," she said. "He did what he said he would do. No games, no hidden assets, no last-minute maneuvering." She paused. "I've been doing this for 22 years. Contested divorces, fraudulent disclosures, asset hiding. I've seen everything. This is one of the cleanest voluntary settlements I've processed." "He read the note," Amelia said. "He read the note." Margaret agreed. Amelia picked up the pen. She signed where she needed to sign. She did it without ceremony, without hesitation, with the same focused efficiency she brought to every document that mattered. When she set the pen down, it was done, and she felt it land not as loss, not as relief, but as something that had been pending for a long time, finally resolving into its correct form. "What now?" Margaret said, in the voice of someone asking a genuine question rather than a professional one. Amelia thought about it honestly. "London in 3 days," she said, "and then I think Singapore after that, and I need to find an apartment." She paused. "Not a temporary one, an actual one. Mine." "That sounds right," Margaret said. "It does," Amelia said, and meant it completely. 6 weeks after the flight on a Tuesday morning that felt nothing like the Tuesday morning that had started all of this, Nathaniel Pierce's consulting business appeared in the financial news. The article was not long. It did not need to be. It covered the Langford audit findings, the breach of partnership complaint, and the departure of 2 of the firm's 3 primary investors. It used language like restructuring and leadership transition and under review, which were the particular words that business journalism used when the truth was simpler and less printable. Marcus Webb was quoted briefly in the professional capacity of a co-founder who had initiated his own liability separation. His quote was careful and accurate and said essentially nothing, which was the correct thing to say. Nathaniel was not quoted. He had not responded to the journalist's request for comment, which Gerald Farrow had advised, and which was probably the most strategically sound decision he had made in recent memory. The article was read by approximately 400 people, which was not very many, and was shared by approximately 40, and was forgotten by most of them within a week. It was not a catastrophic public exposure. It was something quieter and in some ways harder, the permanent searchable factual record of a failure. The kind of thing that comes up when someone types a name into a search engine. The kind of thing that follows a professional reputation, the way a shadow follows a person on a bright day, always there, always attached, impossible to argue with because it is simply true. Nathaniel read it in his apartment, sitting at the rectangular dining table drinking coffee from the machine Amelia had bought. He had not replaced it. He did not know why exactly it was not sentiment, or not only sentiment. It was partly that it made very good coffee, and partly that he was not ready yet to make all the replacements that his new life was going to require, and he was trying in small ways to practice the patience of not moving too fast. He set his phone face down after reading the article. He had spoken to Marcus once briefly 2 weeks ago in the parking garage of a building where they had both had meetings, which was the kind of accidental encounter that a city like New York produced and that no one could entirely avoid. It had lasted 4 minutes, and had been in its 4 minutes the most honest conversation they had ever had. Marcus had told him that the restructure was proceeding, and that he was sorry, and that he hoped Nathaniel found his way through it. And Nathaniel had said thank you, and had meant it, and had felt as Marcus walked away the full specific weight of a friendship that had not survived his choices. He had not tried to argue with it. Argument required a version of events in which he had a case, and he was no longer in the business of constructing those. He thought about that sometimes, the versions of events he had constructed, how good he had been at it, how much energy he had spent on the architecture of his own narrative, shaping, managing, adjusting, always making sure the story he told about himself was one he could live inside comfortably. He was living inside a different story now. It was less comfortable. It was also, he was slowly discovering, more real. He did not know what to do with that yet. He was working on it. The first time Amelia saw her own face in an airport, she did not recognize herself immediately. It was 2 months after the flight. She was moving through Heathrow on the return leg of a London assignment, rolling her bag through the main terminal, thinking about the fuel load on the next rotation, and whether she wanted coffee before her connection. And she looked up, because something caught her peripheral vision, a large format print on the wall above the departures board. Part of a series of airline campaign images she had vaguely known were coming, but had not expected to encounter in this way unannounced in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon in a busy terminal. It was her, full uniform, captain's hat, looking directly at the camera with the particular expression of a person who is completely comfortable in the place where they are standing, which she had been, because the photograph had been taken in a cockpit, and the cockpit was where she was always most herself. Below the image in large, clean type, leading the future of international aviation, Captain Amelia Hart. She stopped walking. A family with a stroller moved around her. A businessman in headphones walked past without looking up. She stood there for a moment and looked at her own face on the wall of Heathrow Airport and felt something she had not felt since before any of this, something uncomplicated and clean and entirely her own. She thought, I look like someone who knows where she is going. She thought, because I do. She picked up her bag and kept walking. She had a flight to catch. What she did not see, because she was already moving, because she had already turned toward her gate and was thinking about fuel loads and connection times and the particular pleasure of a clean takeoff on a clear morning. What she did not see was the man who had stopped at the entrance to the terminal and was looking up at the same image. Nathaniel Pierce had a meeting in London. He had booked it 3 weeks ago, part of the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding a consulting practice that no longer had Langford's backing or Marcus's partnership, but still had, when he was honest about it, his genuine expertise and the relationships that had survived the wreckage. Not all of them had. Enough had. He had come through the main terminal because it was the fastest route to the cab rank, which was why he was standing here now, looking up at a photograph of his wife. His ex-wife, the settlement had been finalized 12 days ago, displayed above the departures board of one of the busiest airports in the world. He stood there for longer than he had intended. He looked at her face. The expression he knew and had not, he understood now fully seen in a very long time. Not because it had changed, because he had stopped looking. Around him, Heathrow moved with its relentless, indifferent efficiency. Thousands of people in transit going somewhere, coming from somewhere, carrying everything they needed and leaving everything they didn't. Nobody noticed him. He was not in this terminal, in this moment, anyone in particular. He was a man in a good coat looking up at a photograph on a wall, and the photograph was of someone who had moved past him so completely that the distance between them was no longer measurable in any unit he knew. He thought about what she had written. She was just busy flying. He thought about the kitchen on a Tuesday morning, the charcoal suit, the cold coffee, the practiced way he had said, "That's great. Really, you've been waiting for this one," and how easy it had been to say it while holding the knowledge of what he was about to do. He thought, I did not deserve her. Not as a consolation, not as self-pity, just as the plain, factual, unadorned truth that he had arrived at slowly over 2 months of living inside a life stripped of the performance he had maintained for so long that he had confused it for his actual self. He had not deserved her. He had not understood what he had. He had treated the most substantial person in his life like a constant, like something that would always be there regardless of what he did, the way you treat the ground beneath your feet, without ever thinking about what keeps it solid. He had been wrong about that. He lowered his gaze from the photograph and picked up his bag and walked toward the exit. He did not look back at the image. He had a meeting to get to, work to do, a version of himself to build that was smaller and more honest and less polished than the one he had destroyed, but that might in time have the advantage of being real. That was what he had now. He was going to have to find out if it was enough. 3 months after flight, 247, Amelia signed a lease on an apartment in Brooklyn. It was smaller than the Manhattan apartment. The ceilings were lower, and the kitchen was not as well equipped, and the view was of another building rather than any kind of skyline. She had looked at 11 apartments before this one, and she had known when she walked into this one that it was right. Not because it was impressive, but because it felt from the first moment she stood in the empty living room like a place where she could be entirely herself without explanation or performance or management. She moved in on a Saturday with Grace and Patricia, who had become in the months since the flight a genuine friend, rather than simply a colleague and a man from the airline's ground crew named Jerome, who had a truck and who did not ask why 3 women were laughing while carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs, only joined in the laughing because it was clearly the right thing to do. The Copenhagen print went up first, on the wall opposite the window where it caught the light in the late afternoon in exactly the way she had always imagined it would if it were in a room that was actually hers. She stood back and looked at it. Grace came to stand beside her holding 2 cups of coffee. "It's right," Grace said. "It's right," Amelia agreed. They drank their coffee and looked at the print and said nothing for a minute, which was the kind of silence that only exists between people who know each other well enough to occupy it without filling it. Then Patricia came in from the kitchen and said, "There are approximately no utensils in this apartment, Captain, which is going to be a problem when the food arrives." And the silence broke into laughter, and the afternoon moved forward in the good ordinary way that good ordinary afternoons do. Later, after Grace and Patricia and Jerome had gone, Amelia sat on the floor of the empty living room. Her furniture was arriving Monday and ate cold noodles from a container and looked at the Copenhagen print in the last of the evening light, and she let herself feel fully and without qualification the specific texture of this moment. She was 41 years old. She was the commanding captain of international routes that she had worked 12 years to earn. She had an apartment that was entirely hers, a legal settlement that was fair and complete, and a set of relationships built on real foundation that had held under exactly the kind of pressure that reveals what things are actually made of. She had also, she acknowledged honestly, a grief that was not finished yet. She did not pretend otherwise. There were mornings when she woke up and the 11 years sat on her chest with a weight she had to consciously lift before she could start the day. There were moments in airports and restaurants and other ordinary places when she saw something, a couple laughing, a shared look. The unremarkable intimacy of 2 people who had chosen each other and felt the loss of it with a sharpness that surprised her by not diminishing as fast as she would have preferred. She had decided going to rush that process. She was going to let it take the time it needed, but she was not going to let it be the whole story either. It was part of the story, a real and significant part. And the rest of the story was the cockpit and the routes and the people who had shown up when it mattered, and the Copenhagen print on the wall and the lease with only her name on it, and the feeling growing clearer every week, compounding like interest that she was moving in exactly the right direction. She thought about what Vanessa had said, which she had learned about indirectly through Margaret, who had heard it from Langford's attorney, who had apparently been told by someone who knew Vanessa's friend. The chain of information was imperfect, and she was aware of that. But what had arrived through it, stripped of everything except its essential meaning, was this: a woman who barely knew her, had watched her walk through a crisis, and had decided she wanted to be that steady. Amelia sat with that. She had not been trying to be an example. She had been trying to do her job and protect herself and get through something very hard with her integrity intact. She had not been performing strength. She had been using it, which was a different thing entirely, because performance is for an audience, and strength is just what you do when there is no other option and the airplane needs to fly. But if it had meant something to someone, if watching a woman refuse to fall apart had made another woman believe she was capable of the same, then that was something. That was more than something. That was the kind of consequence she was willing to claim. She put the noodle container down and looked at the ceiling of her new apartment. She thought about the flight, the manifest, the 4 seconds of sitting with it before she picked up her pen, the 12 hours of flying while the world she had built inside her marriage came quietly, irreversibly apart. The landing smooth and clean at 6:57 in the morning in a city she had never expected to associate with the end of something. She thought about Daniel saying, "I just tried to stay out of the way." She thought about Patricia in the cockpit doorway. She thought about Margaret's voice at 11 at night, saying I was waiting because of course she had been waiting, because that was the kind of people Amelia had built her life around, the ones who stayed. She thought about the photograph in Heathrow. her own face large and clear and entirely composed, looking out at a terminal full of people who were on their way somewhere. She thought, that is who I am. Not the woman whose husband boarded her aircraft with his mistress. Not the woman whose marriage ended at 37,000 feet. Not the woman who walked past him without turning around, though that moment was hers and she would not give it back. She was the woman who flew the airplane, who had always flown the airplane, who had been flying it long before any of this happened, and would be flying it long after the details of it had softened into the past where difficult things eventually go. She was Captain Amelia Hart, and she was just getting started. She got up off the floor, washed the noodle container in the sink of her kitchen, and stood at the window for a moment, looking at the building across the way, where someone had a light on in an upper window and a plant on the ledge that had not been watered recently enough and was leaning hopefully toward the glass. She thought, everything that lives leans toward the light. Then she turned off the kitchen light and went to bed in her own apartment, in her own life that she had built and protected, and was now finally fully free to inhabit. And somewhere above the Atlantic that night, an aircraft crossed the ocean on a route she knew by heart, carrying its passengers safely through the dark toward morning, the way it always did, the way it always would. The sky as she had always known had no ceiling, and she had never once believed otherwise.